This is Unit 1, Module 3, Lesson 2, Pong. So one of the most important things to learn in game development is how to deal with collisions and how you're going to handle those collisions. There are different kinds of collisions. There are collisions with moving objects. There's collisions with rigid walls. And as a programmer, you have to decide how those collisions will affect the objects that they're colliding with. So one of the best ways to do that is to create a Pong game, so you can kind of experience those different types of collisions. In Pong, we have collisions on the walls. We have collisions on the paddle. And then we have a collision on this bottom line here that kind of ends the game. So we have really three different types of collisions that we have to deal with in this game. So here's the code that we're going to be looking at. On the ball, we're going to constantly, or forever, look to see if the ball is touching the paddle. That's our collision check. If the ball is touching the paddle, they're going to play a sound, pick a random number between 160 and 200 to get it to turn, and then we're going to have it move 10 steps. If it's touching color red, then it should stop. At the same time, on the ball, I'm going to have another forever loop that this is when it starts, it goes to this particular location, point it in that direction, and if it's on the edge, bounce. Otherwise, just move 10 steps. So it's moving in two different ways in forever loops. One, it's constantly checking itself to see its location. It's constantly looking for an impact. Then over here in this forever loop, that also occurs when the green flag is clicked, it's checking to see if it's bouncing on the edge, and it's moving. This is where it gets its actual movement from. So if you wanted to change its speed and make it move faster, you would change this value from 10 steps to something else. And you might want to do that, give the user a slider to affect the speed at which the ball moves as they move forward. Or if you do multiple levels, you would make the ball move faster or add more balls for people to reflect off of. You can do a lot of things with Pong in terms of the basic game structure, adding in more paddles, changing the size of the paddle. Those are some really interesting developments you can add to this game. The other thing I have happening here is when the right arrow key is pressed, have it point in the direction of 90 and move 10 steps. When the left arrow key is pressed, have it point in the direction of negative 90 and move it 10 steps. That's the paddle code. Essentially, we're moving the paddle by 10 steps at a time, by 10 increments. You can change the increments that you move the paddle at. You can make it 5 to make it more sensitive, or make it a bigger number to make it less sensitive. The reason that we're doing point 90 and point negative 90 is that gets the paddle. It actually does flip, but because there's no difference between the paddle in its shape in the X direction, the user never actually sees it flip. They don't identify it as flipping. And then we can just move in 10 steps. The other way of doing that would be to move in 10 steps and move in negative 10 steps without changing the direction. That's another way to handle that. So you have that going on. If the touching the paddle or the wall is controlled here, and then over here, we're checking to see if we're touching all the other different edges. We control the bounce. So there's our three different types of collisions. If it touches the paddle, then we reflect off the paddle in some type of angle. Now, those of you who like real game physics, you could do angle of incidence equals angle of reflection and do the math for that. However, in playing a game, what ends up happening is you end up in an endless loop where the paddle gets in a position such that it bounces off the walls, such that it hits the paddle again, and then you end up in a circle and the game isn't fun anymore. So sometimes having real physics in a game can mess up the play of the game. You don't really want things to get to an equilibrium state, and in real physics, things tend to move towards a state of equilibrium. That doesn't make for a fun game. So sometimes we have to fudge the reality and make it bounce in an odd direction. You could also, to choose, change this range to make it more interactive as to how much of an angle it bounces off of it. I did between 160 and 200. Be aware, though, if you do too big, it's kind of bounce down. Right? We're in a circle here, so we have to make sure we're paying attention to that. It's something you want to play with as you work through the game. So your guys' job is to go in and create a Pong game. So there's a sample starting game that you can work with. But then I want you to up the ante. Make it something a little bit special. Not just the one ball and the paddle. Maybe you're adding in another paddle. Maybe you're adding in another ball. Maybe you're changing the way the impact works in some way. Maybe colors change when it gets impacted. Maybe the shape changes to something else. So I want it to be more than just Pong. So here's an example of a massive Pong-ish game that I did. And this is actually pretty hard to play. First off, you notice it's the cat. It's not the sphere, hit green flag, and I think I have this on mouse control. Okay, there's an example. And you can see I end up losing. Notice it's touching green ends it. I'm using the background as kind of an ender rather than using just a red bar. I do have a safety down here, the green bar, in case it doesn't end it, in case it doesn't hit the right shade. And then you have the paddle moving back and forth. Other things you could do, like I said, is if you impact, you could make the paddle change different shapes. You make the paddle change so it's bigger or smaller. You could change the speed at which the paddle moves randomly, or change the speed at which the ball moves randomly based upon the impact. Make extra balls show up. Make it so there's a ball bouncing on the screen that has no effect at all with the paddle, just to distract people. So there's all different types of things that you could do to this game to make it a little bit more than it is. So I expect you, when you create your own version of Pong, to use the starter code, which looks like this. Hang on, wrong link. Remix it so it's your own thing. There are some hints here that you can change that'll help you kind of modify this program, but I want it to be more than just a ball and a paddle. I want it to do something else. So that's your assignment, is to build up Pong so it's a little bit more than just one ball, one paddle. Maybe you have multiple paddles. Maybe you have paddles at the top and the bottom. So it's, more of a, two-person player game, sort of speaking. Somebody uses 2 letters, somebody else uses different 2 letters, and 2 people can play against each other. So you guys come up with whatever you want. Be creative. I expect to see special stuff. When you're done, submit it inside of Blackboard here at the Remix Pong. Okay? And see you next time.